The Haunting Case of a Maui Child, a shocking true crime story. In the tropical paradise of Maui, where the vibrant blues of the ocean meet lush green landscapes, an unspeakable horror unfolded in 2021 that shattered the serenity of the island. This is the story of relentless abuse, eerie silence, and unimaginable tragedy. On a fateful day, an emaciated child was discovered at the brink of death, his body bruised, his voice gurgling, and his fragile life hanging by a thread. This case is a devastating reminder of what happens when evil is left unchecked and silence becomes complicity. It was an ordinary day in 2021 when eyewitness Legsay stumbled upon a nightmare that would haunt her forever. Testifying in court, her words painted a gut-wrenching picture of what she saw. He was gurgling, his eyes were rolling. I noticed he had blue on his forehead and back. It's an image you can't get out of your head, she recounted. The child, barely clinging to life, was dressed only in a diaper. His small frame was hauntingly thin, a testament to prolonged neglect and abuse. Legsay went on to describe the heart-stopping moment when the child, frail and limp, failed to respond. When she stood up, he went limp. So I panicked even more, she admitted, her voice trembling as she relived the unshakable sight of the victim's suffering. The sheer horror that unfolded was not only in the child's condition, but in the suffocating realization that no one had stepped in sooner. The child's suffering did not happen in isolation. He was a victim of heinous abuse inflicted under the watch of two individuals presumed to protect him. A Maui man whose identity we will not dignify by repeating stood at the center of this barbarity. This man represented a chilling face of cruelty, persistent and merciless physical abuse that pushed an innocent child to the edge of life itself. But he wasn't alone. Ashley Quirk, a name now etched in the annals of betrayal, played her role not as a direct abuser, but as an accomplice through her brazen indifference. Despite witnessing the ongoing abuse, Quirk made a harrowing decision that forever altered the child's life. She chose silence. Rather than speak out or alert authorities, she allowed the unfathomable torment to continue unchecked. For this, she was charged with attempted murder. Her failure to act robbed that child of his agency, his safety, and almost his life, making her omission as damning as the abuse itself. It is an unimaginable reality. The victim, a young and innocent child, was thrust into a world of cruelty and neglect. His small body bore the scars of relentless violence. Not a single detail of his condition was free of horror. By the time he was discovered, he was on the cusp of death, bruised, battered, and with his spirit seemingly extinguished. His skinny frame told the story of prolonged malnourishment and deprivation. Who was there to protect him? Who should have sounded the alarm when he needed help the most? These questions only deepen the tragedy of this case. They serve as a painful reminder of the necessity to always act, to shatter the silence, to ensure that no vulnerable child endures such horror ever again. The courtroom trial that followed was as chilling as the crime itself. Over the course of the legal proceedings, testimonies unraveled a tale of violence, neglect, and sinister silence. Witnesses, including Legsay, bravely detailed the harrowing discoveries of that fateful day, recounting every broken detail that the victim had suffered. The male perpetrator, whose horrific actions led directly to the child's suffering, received a stern sentencing. The court deemed his violent actions unforgivable and handed down a punishment meant to reflect the severity of his crime. Ashley Quirk, however, was charged with attempted murder, not for laying a hand on the victim, but for her gross negligence. Her failure to notify authorities or step in to prevent the abuse carried grave consequences. The law saw her silence as an enabler of abuse, a statement that hopefully sets a precedent for future cases of complicity in child maltreatment. Among the many heart-wrenching moments in court, Legsay's testimony stood out. Her words were a recall of sheer horror. He was very skinny. It's an image you can't get out of your head. The vulnerability of the child was palpable in the courtroom that day. These testimonies served as vivid reminders of how much was lost. of how inaction allowed the suffering to escalate, and how those moments of witness could have made all the difference. Quirk's situation serves as much more than a legal indictment. It's a moral narrative. Her inaction to report the ongoing abuse speaks to a dangerous and recurring issue: the silence of bystanders. Abuse thrives in secrecy, and when bystanders fail to act, they enable cruelty in ways that are as destructive as the abusers themselves. Quirk's role in this case raises an unsettling question. What would have happened if she had come forward? The burden of her silence now weighs heavily on the legacy of this case, reminding us that inaction can be as deadly as action. This case sent shockwaves through the Maui community. News of the child's abuse and the court proceedings left the island grappling with the reality of hidden violence, occurring even in what many perceive as a paradise. People sought to understand how such neglect could persist, how warning signs could be missed, and how silence continued to stifle intervention. The media's coverage of the case brought it to national attention, generating public outrage, sorrow, and, ultimately, an urgent call to action. Citizens and advocacy groups began demanding stronger mechanisms to protect children from abuse and to punish those who look the other way. This case is not just a grim recollection of a single child's suffering, it's a crucial lesson for society. It underscores the importance of vigilance, voice, and action. Every one of us has a role to play in combating child abuse and neglect, whether by identifying warning signs, reporting suspicions, or supporting victims through action. The silence of witnesses is not neutral. It is deadly. Too many lives have been lost, stolen at the hands of abusers, and compounded by the bystanders who chose not to act. This chilling case must serve as a call for change, for breaking the cycle of secrecy that allows abuse to wreak havoc. As we close this disturbing chapter of the Maui case, let it not be in vain. Let this story inspire viewers to take a stand, to act when faced with the signs of abuse. Let it be a rallying cry for justice, accountability, and awareness. Children need protecting. They cannot shoulder the burden of violence and neglect alone. The haunting image of this child, alone, bruised, and silent, is one that remains etched in our collective conscience. It is a reminder of the moral imperative to intervene, to rescue, and to report. Final thoughts. This case is a sobering reminder of how deeply abuse shakes the human spirit. It teaches us about the failures of humanity, but also about the potential for change. No child should endure what this young boy did. We close this video with a solemn message. Be vigilant. Be the voice that speaks out. Be the one that protects. Because the silence of one can mean the suffering of another. Together, we can break this cycle. While the child's story is tragic, his legacy could save countless more. Let his story remind us to never turn a blind eye, because sometimes the roaring call for justice begins with a single brave voice.